Auston Matthews scores in his return as the Maple Leafs bounce back with a dominant win over Chicago. Welcome into Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at Bodog.net's Rob Wong, joined alongside by David Alter, who comes to us from Scotiabank Arena, where the Maple Leafs picked up the 5-2 win over Chicago, bouncing back after a disappointing loss on Saturday night against the lowly Columbus Blue Jackets. And we spoke about it, Dave. The Maple Leafs probably would like to go 4-0, but maybe 3-1 over this stretch with Columbus, Chicago, Montreal, and Chicago again. So they suffered that one loss on Saturday to Columbus for the allotment that we allowed them to have. And here they are with the bounce-back win. But very interesting start to this game, to say the least. William Nylander scoring just 9 seconds in. We'll hear his thoughts on that goal in just a moment. But the Blackhawks responding shortly after with their first goal of the game on their first shot. Pretty rare that you see that where both teams score on the first shot, but it felt like, oh boy, is it going to be one of these games? Like, this is the last thing that Sheldon Keefe wants after his comments following the Columbus game.
Yeah, and everything kind of set up for it. I think when, Rob, you're the betting guy among the two of us. I think this was the most heavily slanted, one-sided, like favored versus underdog, like that's ever been posted. And by the time it got to it, if not third, I think it started one way and then it got to minus 600, which I don't think I've ever seen before for a favorite team. So there was that. Then they go into the game. Toronto scores in that opening minute. William Nylander with that crazy play, and you think, okay, maybe Vegas knew something about this game. Maybe this is actually going to be the way we thought. And then, of course, Chicago scores back. A little wild. Of course, Sam Lafferty's also kind of been in trade talk and in some other ways as well. So it's kind of funny that he was kind of involved in that. But just kind of going back and forth in that first minute and 2 seconds, you kind of didn't know what to expect. And then it just kind of settled in. And at that point, the Leafs did a good job of at least taking control of that game in the second period and not letting it get too far out of hand. They were aided by, I think it was John Tavares who had the goal taken away in the first period due to offside. So the Leafs didn't bend from that. And then, the second period, it really kind of pulled away. It looked like Chicago might kind of catch them sleeping early on, even though they were caught sleeping in the opening minute. But Peter Mrazek was Peter Mrazek, and the Leafs were the Leafs. And it pretty much went the way we all expected it, especially with Chicago playing on back-to-back nights and Toronto here fully rested. So kind of hard to take more than what it was. Should have been a gimme 2 points, and it was for the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yeah, and you mentioned the betting line. We will definitely talk about that coming up later with the Bodog line of the day. But let's hear from William Nylander, who got things going for the Maple Leafs on that quick strike goal.
We just talked about it in the locker room, and that was kind of what we're going to try to do, and it worked out. It's nice that it worked out like that.
How did you know? Why did you want to go to that play to start the game?
I think it was Maddie's idea to draw that play up, and I just saw that the space. Usually it's not open. Luckily he blew a tire there and gave me the space. So, but yeah, it was a nice play.
Yeah, definitely a nice play. I think many people just getting into their seats were kind of stunned to look up and already see Hall & Oates playing over the speakers as William Nylander scores less than 10 seconds in. But
I'll admit it, I was getting ice cream. Right. To get to my seat. And then I come down. I was like, what'd I miss?
Well, you don't expect a goal to be scored 9 seconds into the first period or any period, really. It's pretty rare. But it was interesting to hear Nylander talk about how Matthews kind of drew up that play and like, this is what we're going to do off the face-off. And it worked to a T. He loves it when a plan comes together, does William Nylander. So that was pretty cool to see how that worked out. But, Jake McCabe, another guy who has been connected to the Maple Leafs, not exactly a great look for him as he falls on that play, allowing Nylander to score. But that sort of set the tone for the Leafs in this one. And, Auston Matthews, a lot was made of his return, Dave, and he, of course, picks up the goal this evening in his return to the lineup. But let's hear from head coach Sheldon Keefe, who was asked by you after the game about what he's going to take away from this one.
I think, frankly speaking, it's a game we're not gonna evaluate too much in terms of anything good, anything bad, we're going to wash it and move on. Enjoy a day off tomorrow and get ready for Montreal.
What is that? Just is it just because of the level of the opponent?
Well, we got a tired team in here on a back-to-back, and it's it's a team that's a team. I didn't think the game had much life to it, and so it's not what you come to expect. In terms of what it's like to play in the NHL, and there was a lot of emotion in the game today. So it's a game that we're happy to get through with 2 points.
And we've talked about this before in games where the Maple Leafs have, faced some inferior opponents in some very favorable spots. And it's sort of, well, how much of this can you really take away? I mean, as much as I would love to talk about the connection that Auston Matthews and William Nylander have, and, Alex Kerfoot on that second line with Tavares and Marner, it's the Chicago Blackhawks on the second half of a back-to-back. Like, there's not really much you can say. I know coming in, everyone was wondering, oh, geez, are the Leafs going to lose this game? They've done it so many times already this year. But, after you watch that, you go, oh, yeah, that's what happens on most nights in the NHL. And it is pretty rare that massive underdogs, come in on a spot like that and pick up a win. It happens, but it's maybe not as often as people would make it out to be.
Yeah, I mean, I'm still of the belief that it happens once out of every 3 games. It just really is a roulette of when it's going to happen in those, which is why, a friend of mine always gave me that strategy, or I even talked with him, which was, if you ever see plus 200 for any NHL team for a straight win, take it. Because more often than not, they'll hit it, and you may lose more than you win, but in the long run, you'll win more money because... it's just hard to kind of, with overtimes, with shootouts, with all that stuff, with the way schedules are compromised. There's always standings and who's home and whose road seem to dominate most of the line action on the money line. So, we've seen it happen with the Leafs a lot this year. It happens with other top teams against lower opponents more than we expect. Boston lost to this team earlier in the season, and Boston doesn't lose very many games. So I think it happens more often than maybe we feel. And just when we always say it happens to Toronto, it's because, this is a Toronto-based podcast where it's been a problem for them. And perhaps they should have had better records as a result of it. And it gets frustrating when they're playing well against the good teams and then not against the lower teams if you're a Leaf fan. So I get it in that regard. But a couple things that Sheldon Keefe touched upon there. And I'm glad he was honest about it because, even being here, it was funny. The Leafs would score a goal. The crowd would do the obligatory, yeah, like for the cheer. And then as soon as the goal music hit, I'm looking around and it's quiet, like really quiet. Like, I could not believe it. I actually took my cell phone out and just did a pano of the crowd. It might be a TikTok. We'll see. But I'm not seeing anyone high-fiving, not seeing anyone kind of cheering still, not really up on their feet anymore. And that's it. I could not believe how quiet it was after every Toronto goal. So I'm glad Sheldon actually talked about it. And the reason I followed up is because I really wanted to know, was it just because this team is so bad? And I didn't expect them to say it's a meaningless game and everything's kind of gearing up for the playoffs, and we all know who the Leafs are going to play in the playoffs. But it's just, that's just kind of the vibe right now. It really is. It's like, okay, if they lose, it's a crisis. But if they score, it's like, yeah, that's supposed to happen. And, we'll get up and cheer for the goal, but that's about it. And the Leafs are not taking anything good or bad from this game. And to me, that's kind of the same attitude that they're treating this game. They're just just get out of it. It's not going to mean anything. We got to move on to the next one, and it's going to be another lowly team, although it's Toronto-Montreal on a Saturday night, so that should help with the energy, you would think. But, there's that. And then the other thing about William Nylander and Auston Matthews setting up that play, Sheldon Keefe said after the game as well that that's something that he's been asking the Stars to kind of take more of a charge. Call your own play if you want to. Do that. You've been around. You know the tendencies at this point. He's fine with them taking more responsibility in that regard. And it's something I've noticed this year, and it's not even just the star players. Before every face-off, the team is huddling like they're the quarterback on offense. They're always huddling before the face-off to think about what they're going to do. There's seldom a time where they haven't combined as a group as if they're playing football and not huddled before going into the face-off. Sometimes it's just a quick conversation or whatever that you would see in the past, but this is a full 5-man huddle that the Leafs are doing before every face-off, and this just happened to be before the very first one that led to the way they scored the way they did.
All right, well, let's hear from Auston Matthews, who scored in his return from injury. He says the team made sure to not let this one get away when Chicago was able to answer.
I think that's the response we wanted. I mean, I think anytime there was a little, lull in our game throughout this one, or we leaked or slipped a little bit, I thought we got it right back, pretty immediately in the next couple of shifts. And I think that's the way, obviously, we want it to work. Is there's going to be momentum shifts throughout the game, and just making sure that we get it right back as quickly as possible.
And I feel like a lot of people probably thought, man, after Sam Lafferty scored that answer goal on William Nylander, was, oh boy, like, here we go. The Leafs are going to, have their lull here. They're already going to feel the pressure from Chicago tying this one up. And then, of course, in the second period, Chicago scores 46 seconds in to make it a 1-goal game. And you're thinking, oh boy, here we go. Second period was an issue against Columbus the other night. Is this going to happen? But they really did not let it get out of control. Like Auston Matthews said, the Maple Leafs took control of the game after Philip Kurushev's second goal for Chicago. They scored 2 more goals the rest of the way. Third period is pretty uneventful. And that's all you can really ask, I think, for if you're Sheldon Keefe when you face these inferior opponents. It's don't get outplayed like the Maple Leafs were in the second period against Columbus and in the third period against the Blue Jackets as well. You're going to have games where I can think of one in particular that was not the Maple Leafs, but the Carolina Hurricanes. I think they put, 60-plus shots in UC Saros? Like, if you have those types of games, you got to tip your cap. But, Carolina did everything they could do. They just got goalie. And I think if you're Sheldon Keefe, you'll live with a hot goalie, stopping you in any given game. But when you're getting outplayed by the Blue Jackets or even by the Montreal Canadiens, regardless of history, or the Chicago Blackhawks, like, that's when you got to put your foot down and say, this is unacceptable. But if we put out our best effort and, the goalie makes 50 saves, not tonight with Peter Mrazek in goal, he did make 40 saves, I think it was.
Hooray. Yeah.
He was only 10 off. I actually made 37 saves. The Maple Leafs, I think, had some shots taken away by the scorekeeper by the end of this. But my point is, regardless, they outplayed Chicago for a large majority of this game, and they got the results. And if you're Sheldon Keefe, I know what he said before, but I think, you're just happy with your team bouncing back in the fashion that they did.
Yeah, 71% expected goals at 5-on-5. I mean, you look at the underlying stats, there's throw domination. There's a reason why this is the game that it was. And while the Leafs might have been okay with being goalied, or from a personal standpoint, I still think it would have got to them a little bit, or even the fans would have just been going nuts if Peter Mrazek came out with a UC Saros-like performance and beat the Leafs in a typical revenge game type scenario. But that did not happen. Fraser Minton is the legacy of Peter Mrazek and his time in Toronto, because they moved from 25th in the draft to 38th in the draft by getting rid of Peter Mrazek's contract, and Chicago clearly in tank mode, despite what Gary Bettman says. Getting Peter Mrazek for this year and next year, and the Leafs were able to get the result that was expected. And I think there's just this concerted effort, because we're going to have this team again on Sunday. We're going to be there for you. And Saturday against the Montreal Canadiens before, a team that's really hungry in the Buffalo Sabres, who's in that wild card chase. And that game I'm already looking forward to, because that battle of the QEW is going to be really exciting again. And it's been a long time since we've been able to say that. So that should be a fun one. The Montreal Saturday crowd should be a fun one. But yeah, maybe the Sunday one will be a bit tougher for the Leafs, because we'll be on the back half of a back-to-back, and it'll be a quick turnaround because it'll be a 5:00 Central start. But man, oh man, Sheldon Keefe put it perfectly. You can't take much from this game. And it seemed like even the fans, there were fans with Blackhawks jerseys here, Rob. Like, I thought there'd be a little bit more energy in the building, and it was a tough one. It really was.
Yeah, there's going to be games like these. And like you said, with the way the fans reacted, even when the Maple Leafs scored, kind of bizarre. But sometimes, look, it is a very first world problem thing to say, and someone that has gotten a privilege to cover many games and attend games. But sometimes you're just there because you gotta go, right? Like you're a season ticket holder. No one wants your tickets because it's the Blackhawks, and it's well, I gotta go to the game, and so I'm here.
I think it went as low as $30,
right?
On the resale.
It's okay,
I think I saw
they
30
score. They score, I have to do the obligatory applause and cheer, and then as soon as the puck's dropped, I go back to my phone. I feel like there's a lot of that, probably more of the, I don't want to, paint everyone with the same brush, but maybe more of the people in the platinum seats than maybe up in the nosebleeds. But regardless, it wasn't a game full of a lot of emotion. This was more meaningful to the Maple Leafs than it was to Chicago, of course, who was in such a tough spot. But like Sheldon Keefe said before, you pick up the 2 points, you move on with your life, and see where things go Saturday night against the Montreal Canadiens. Conor Timmins, though, I'm pretty sure this was a meaningful game for him, getting back into the lineup for the first time in quite some time, and gets a goal tonight. And here we go with Conor Timmins, who, picked up another point, and since becoming a Toronto Maple Leaf has been very effective. And considering what the Maple Leafs gave up in Curtis Douglas to get this guy, he's been great. And I know people's views on him, some people's views may be skewed because he was really bad in that one game against the Boston Bruins when he got more of a push and was playing alongside Morgan Riley. But you take away that one game, or even if you want to include it, on the whole now with this guy in his 19 games, he's got 13 points. I don't think anybody expected this from Conor Timmins since coming to the Maple Leafs.
No, and that game was going back to my other point that Timmins should not have been in that spot. Riley needed a more stable, more reliable defensive partner and not be rotating as much as he was when it wasn't even all injury related. The Brody absence was, but before then, it was a rotating cast of characters for Riley, and Timmins was one of those guys. And yeah, I get it. They tried Holmberg on the second line as well because they just want to see what they got. So they try, right? They put him in for a game and see. But for Timmins and Boston, that's a tall task. I know you're really high on this guy, but you really don't want to destroy someone's confidence in that situation. You want to kind of build toward that assignment. And I thought that might have been too much too quickly at that point, and we hadn't seen it since January 27th as a result of that. That was a long time ago. And then, Sheldon Keefe, who's been very honest lately, I was the one who asked him about the defensive change that was going in after practice yesterday with Justin Hall coming out, being a healthy scratch tonight for the first time this season, and just said point blank, we like Timmins' game, and we've been waiting for a reason to put him in, but everyone's been playing well, and essentially it was don't give me a reason. And Justin Hall was -3 and on for 3 of those Jackets goals in that game that didn't go their way, and so that was a reason Timmins got his shot again. And probably going to be the same group of guys going up against Montreal, because I didn't see a quote-unquote reason to take Timmins out of the game, despite the fact that he took a couple of minor penalties. Outside of that, I thought he was pretty good. He was well positioned. He got that goal. That's his first home NHL goal. Remember, his other one came in Philadelphia on the road. And just taking a quick look here in Conor Timmins, he had some blocks as well. So, you couldn't really ask for more. A couple of block shots for Conor Timmins as well. You really couldn't ask for more from an all-round game. The penalties didn't come back to bite the Leafs in the end. If that did, maybe we're talking about a different story. But Conor Timmins has been money. That's why he got that 2-year, $2.2 million extension. Even though he hadn't played so long, he got an extension out of all of it.
Yeah, it feels a little too on the nose that, he gets that extension and then he ends up heading into the lineup for Justin Hall, who is a UFA at the end of the season. Not saying that it's going to be one for one.
That. Yeah, but Justin Hall was definitely the worst defenseman in that.
No, of course. I'm just saying it's kind of funny that, he signs the extension and then it goes in for the guy that look, I don't want to say Justin Hall's not going to be a Maple Leaf next year, but, things are kind of pointing to that not being the case because of Timothy Liljegren and his ability to take it the next step this year. You've got TJ Brody, you've got Morgan Riley, Mark Giordano as well, like Rasmus Sandin. Who knows what the Leafs do at the deadline? The signs are pointing. Let's just say that the writing is on the wall potentially for Justin Hall to be not a Maple Leaf at the end of the season, going into next season, I should say. But getting back to Timmins, there's been a lot of talk about that slap shot that he showed off tonight. He says the ability to crank it from the points may or may not be true.
I think I just took one hard shot when I got here, and they've all been sticking with that story, so now I feel like I have to prove it a little bit. But, it was just nice to get one through.
It is so funny because the Leafs have not had that big blast from the points since probably Brian McCabe. So people are obsessed. People are obsessed. Let's put it that way. With big point shots.
There was the on-foot. But it got wild very quickly after his arrival. That was the problem.
Yeah, well, he broke
Joffrey
Lupul's arm one time with a slap shot. So that kind of goes to show you. But look, people are obsessed with that big point shot. The reality is these days there aren't a ton of guys that really do that. I mean, Shea Weber, one of the last, big name guys that had that big, blast from the points on the power play or what have you. There's other guys around the league that could do it, but it's just not really, the most efficient way to score a goal in the NHL these days. But, it just kind of gets back to the toolbox that Conor Timmins has, a guy that, can take a pretty heavy shot. I mean, Timothy Liljegren has a pretty heavy shot as well, just as an aside. But, the guy can move the puck. The guy can do a little bit of everything. And for his cap hit moving forward here, even if he's not a regular heading into next season and he's a guy that can, be that 7th, 8th guy, I mean, he's just so useful, especially when this team is dealing with the, cap constraints that they currently have and will have moving forward. And, I think, you look at the guy, he's 24 years old. You would think that there's probably more to be unlocked as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. Look, this is a very friendly contract for the Toronto Maple Leafs in terms of what can and can't happen. I think I got Timmins aside the other day just to kind of ask him about the contract because I hadn't kind of congratulated him or even got his thoughts on it because so much had happened over the break. And when they announced that deal, it was also the same time Kyle Dubas was speaking, and we thought we were going to get an update on Muzzin. We got an update on Matthews. We got an update on Matt Murray as well. There was just so much news, and they snuck a Matt Murray extension in there, a Conor Timmins extension in there as well. So we didn't really have a chance to kind of talk to him about it, and he hadn't been in the lineup, so it wasn't really kind of a reason. But, he kind of said that this was kind of going back to a couple months ago that the Leafs were looking to extend him, but it was just a matter of something that he and his agent were going to deal with. He obviously tried to stay out of the talks, but his agent would come to him when an offer was made, and eventually they agreed on this. And what's great for the Leafs about this is if it doesn't work or it's year number 2, it's not that it's over the minimum or anything like that. It's over the threshold of what's fully variable to the point where if it doesn't work out in the second year of the deal or whatever, that contract can easily be buried in the minors if he doesn't get claimed. So for that reason, it gives the Leafs a lot of flexibility in terms of what they might do, not just next year, but even the year after that. In the odd event it doesn't work out, I think there's a lot of potential there that for that number, he's going to get quite the bit of rope. Obviously, Justin Hall does not have a contract beyond this season. And if they have to make other decisions there, that's a good 6-7 number of someone you trust that you can kind of put in there. And then you can find other depth pieces for cheaper if Justin Hall is the guy you end up losing. Or maybe they do retain Hall for a cap hit similar to what he has right now. Who knows what the market is going to be for someone like him? That's going to be a very interesting question as well. I think there is a lot that the Leafs liked about how he stepped up when other guys got hurt. So I wouldn't be quick to write off Justin Hall very quickly. I could see a situation where maybe he goes to open market, but then if the Leafs have the space, they figure out something. So there's a lot of things that they liked about his penalty killing, the way he stepped up in an increased role as other guys got hurt, that I do feel that they still value him. I don't know if the market's going to fit him in. That's going to be the big question with someone like Justin Hall.
Yeah, and I probably is putting the cart ahead of the horse there with regards to Justin Hall not being back. I just look at the situation that they're in with all these UFAs and, some contracts that they might have to sign to bring some, guys that are important to this team. Not that they're necessarily more important than Justin Hall, but just from a forward standpoint, I mean, we've got 6 UFAs set to hit free agency for the Maple Leafs this year up front. So they have more depth on the back end right now that can fill in for Justin Hall. And, I know there's a lot of people in this fan base that aren't the biggest fans of his, but the reality is, he's 31 years old. He's a guy, like you said, can play a big role in the penalty kill, can play in the top 4 on a good team, as we're seeing here. And he is the right shot, right? Everybody loves right shot defensemen, and they're not easy to find. And I look around the league, and, we talk a lot about Luke Schenn. We talk a lot about Zach Bogosian, Tyler Myers, right? Like all of these big-bodied right-handed shot guys, and people are obsessed with them. And I know Justin Hall's not a physical player like those guys necessarily. He can use his body from time to time, but the idea that he's going to go to market and not have suitors, I think is going to be, a little bit of a stretch. I think if he does hit free agency,
on the flip side,
people are going to be looking at this guy, right? Like they've seen what he's done. I think, the word has gotten out that he can be an effective player. Maybe not, full-time top 4 on a championship team necessarily, but he's an NHL player. And I think, he's going to have teams that are definitely going to be talking to him come the summer if he gets there.
Yeah. On the flip side, though, we talk about Luke Schenn, but Luke Schenn's cap hit's only $850,000, right? And he's 33 years old. And even though he's helped out the Tampa Bay Lightning championships, they all came at like near minimum deals. And so, he had to resurrect his career, not unlike Justin Hall in some ways. Justin Hall wasn't as highly touted as Luke Schenn was, but Justin Hall was pretty much drifting in the AHL and outside of any sort of NHL level contract till he joined the Marlies, I believe it was in 2017, and then got upgraded to an NHL level contract. And in his later mid-20s, scrapping his way to figure out what he is as an NHL player. And so now he's going to have to do that, but he's going to be 31, as you mentioned. So do people want to pay that much for a 31-year-old, or do they look at the Luke Schenn, who's 31, 32, and 30 before that, and got him at a cap way lower for the role that he plays? So it's a challenge. It really is. Like, I can see someone overpaying for Justin Hall, but it might be a bad team. Chicago could be a great fit for him, actually. Like, if that's the case where he can get paid, but it's just going to be a matter of, is he going to be on a top flight team making a lot of money, or is he going to be, a bit more of a role player making a little bit less? And I think that's going to be the real question between now and the summer about kind of where Justin Hall lands in the equation of all of this.
Yeah, going to be interesting to see where it all shakes out for him down the next few months here. Coming up on Rinkwide Toronto, we will get to the Bodog line of the day. And we haven't had a chance to talk about Patrick Kane, who was a big storyline coming into this one as well. The Maple Leafs, though, win it 5-2 over the Chicago Blackhawks. You're listening to Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog. Free casino games and sports odds. It is time to play at bodog.net. It is Rinkwide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Nearly 2.5 billion people are shopping online globally, and a lot of that shopping has been done on mobile phones. So how does your business website look and function on a mobile phone? Hey, it's Ray Ferraro. Right now, my friends at North Beach, along with their partners at Craft Growth, are offering small business owners and entrepreneurs a free website digital audit. So you can find out if your website is properly optimized for a great mobile phone shopping experience. E-commerce has never been more important. So visit craftgrowth.net and get your free digital audit. That's craftgrowth.net.
Naslund.
We weren't afraid of facing any line or any deep pairing because we knew that we would generate offense.
Bertuzzi.
I was like, I can play in this league and I can play a big role in this league and I can be dominant if all the stars align.
Morrison.
There was a confidence that we believed if we went out and played the way we were capable, we could score every shift.
Their story in their words. Unreal West Coast Express. Available now on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
It is Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, the place to play free casino games and get the latest sports odds. Rob Wong joined alongside by David Alter, who comes to us from Scotiabank Arena, where the Maple Leafs picked up the 5-2 win over the Chicago Blackhawks. Time for the Bodog line of the day, and we talked a little bit about it off the top, about how the Maple Leafs were massive favorites heading into this one. I didn't see any of the lines right up until puck drop, but the ones I did see maybe an hour or two before, and depending on the sports book you're looking at, but I believe on Bodog it was minus 600 at one point, which is pretty crazy. I know I saw the tweet from Evolving Wilds, who people might know does Evolving Hockey. There are a couple of brothers from Minnesota, do a lot of the analytical stuff. But on the Evolving Wild Twitter, they retweeted a tweet back from October the 3rd, 2022, and it said, quote, based on team rosters today, the most lopsided game we predict for the 2022-23 season is Chicago at Toronto on February the 15th. Chicago is on the second night of a back-to-back. The Leafs have an 84.1% chance of winning. So they called it back on October the 3rd that this would be the most lopsided game in the NHL this season. And it came to fruition. I think it would have been this way regardless. I mean, the Leafs probably would have had to miss, Tavares, Matthews, Nylander, and Marner for things to really shift in Chicago's favor. But that just kind of gives you a sense of, how bad of a spot that Chicago was in, that people that do a lot of the analytical stuff could see this months away just based on how the rosters were sitting at that point, even with Chicago before all the stuff that we're about to talk about with regards to Patrick Kane and maybe even Jonathan Toews.
Yeah, I mean, it's so bizarre because they do have talent on their team. I mean, remember, they inked Seth Jones to a long-term contract, and he's supposed to be a future piece of this franchise. So they did that not too long ago. And you're just if you're him, you're just kind of God, I hope this goes somewhere fast, because, as other guys and useful pieces start kind of going away, you start to wonder, what do you really have? I thought it was really interesting. I can't remember if it was Kane or Toews that made a pretty interesting comment about Kirby Dach's success in Montreal. And they pretty much took a shot at the current organization. So yeah, they're putting in a position where he's getting a lot of reps and being patient. And that's why you're seeing him succeed right now, where Chicago's really quick to give up on a top flight prospect, but not just him. The big question mark was when they traded Alex DeBrincat to Ottawa. That one was also a head scratcher because he was so young. And you're just kind of giving up on a prospect so early in his career, and it's one that's been so good for you. Maybe he was threatening the tank too much. I don't know, but come on, a lot of these kind of defied logic, that it almost seemed cerebral in Chicago's attempt to just finally get the guys that want moved to not feel too comfortable with their positions, and Kane and Toews. And so, I mean, this is the year if they were going to move at all, right? So, I think they seem to be more open to it, especially when Kane came out and was pretty vocal about the Rangers grabbing Vladimir Tarasenko, which I don't think anyone expected to hear such candidates. And then, there's Jonathan Toews, who we've talked about on this podcast as well, who I kind of like in a third line center role, because he is that. Where, Kane has been he's more of a strength winger, where I do think Toronto needs more depth at the center position. So either it could Toews or even Ryan O'Reilly, if that ends up working out, makes more sense. But yeah, because they played the night before, there was no availability from the Blackhawks. And even after the game, Patrick Kane declined, or the Blackhawks declined to let Patrick Kane speak to the media. So we didn't really get any sort of thoughts there. A bunch of players said before and after the game from the Maple Leafs perspective, not addressing any sort of rumor specifically, of course, but saying that it would be kind of weird to see him wearing a different kind of jersey. Some said, it is weird at first, but now given the way things kind of evolve now in the league, where this is more of a regular occurrence, you kind of get used to seeing guys wearing different jerseys now. So it'll be an interesting one. Patrick Kane, does he need the spark? Would a place like the Rangers look like one of the more stacked teams in the NHL right now. And I just looked at, there was a tweet going around about the 4 lines, and those 4 lines, granted, they have VC as a second line winger in those lines, but outside of that, it looked pretty strong. So I can understand why Kane was a little bit upset there. But yeah, it's going to be fun between now and March 3rd to see where these Chicago guys go. I think it would be a little weird to see them in different jerseys, but I mean, they've won 3 cups. You got to find ways to stay motivated. And the contract is certainly coming to an end for both of these guys. So the time is now to kind of do something. And I'm curious to see if they'll actually relinquish their no moves to kind of go somewhere else.
Yeah, tonight I was definitely keeping my eye on Patrick Kane just to see, what kind of game he would have. And he had moments of, things that were working well. I think of the power play that he was on where he coughed up the puck, and I think it was David Kampf going back the other way, and he skated as hard as he could to break up that scoring opportunity. But then there's, the Auston Matthews goal where Kane is trying to stay with William Nylander, and then he kind of just lets him go and kind of gives up defensively. And, Matthews is able to score there. And I think, there's been a lot of chatter about that this year where his defensive game, which has never been great. Like, I think, let's be honest, he's never been known as a defensive player. But sometimes maybe the effort has been lacking, whether that's because he's on a losing team and he's just not trying to give it his all right now. He's been injured, of course, too. But yeah, it's just so hard to know what you're going to get. Because I've seen people say, well, if he comes to Toronto or if he goes to a contender, he's just going to, flip that switch and turn it up and look like the guy he was last year and the guy that everybody knows that he is. But, there's a non-zero chance that he's not that anymore. And whether that's injury or what have you, guys can lose it pretty quick. Not saying that he's, lost it by any means as far as the offensive talent goes, but, father time comes for everyone. And, Patrick Kane, I don't think is, going to be able to slip by, unless he's Jaromir Jagr, who just turned 51 today and is still a beast over in Europe playing in all these men's professional leagues. But, I think that's just the question mark. If you're a team that's looking at Patrick Kane, do you know with 100% certainty that if you make the trade to get this guy, that it's going to work out? Because there's a risk, right, that comes with Patrick Kane that I think people are sort of just brushing aside because he's a future Hall of Famer.
Yeah, and I think that as they hold cards, it's really going to depend on what the price is. And so say Kane does decide to move, but there's only one team that he's willing to go to outside of whatever, or he just picks that team. Well, then, it will be worth it if the cost is only a second round pick and then another later round pick for another team to kind of absorb half the cap hit. Because if it's, say, the Leafs or another contending team, they're not going to be able to absorb 0.5 million cap hit. It has to be a quarter of that. And so the only way to do that is find a broker. And so you get down to 2.625 million in cap hit. The Leafs have to find that, give up some picks. But then they could also say, look, we have these concerns. And so we're not going to give that much. If he wants to come here, we'll make it work and have another team help with that. But apart from that, we're taking a big risk here with someone like him. So, they can play it cool that other way as well. And whatever team he wants to go to, if they feel Kane is that, then that's going to be on them to decide what the return is in that regard. Because a 10.5 million cap hit is huge, and you got to get it down to 2.625 million. So, yeah, it'll be tough. Jonathan Toews has seen kind of concerns about where his game's at, and so that'll be a question for him if he ends up moving as well and to a contending team. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one because the Leafs do have very little cap hit in space to kind of work with. The Muzzin one seems like we don't have an update, but we'll figure that out. But even then, I think they'll need more LTI space, and you're going to have to try and figure out how to get it. Gustav Nyquist has an injury that could put him on LTI for the remainder of the year. I wouldn't be surprised if teams start looking at just acquiring guys who have long-term injuries to give themselves more space, especially if they're on expiring deals. And that would be kind of an interesting way to kind of get around that too.
Yeah, I think what it really comes down for me with the Leafs and the trade deadline is here, they tried it with Nick Foligno and they've tried it with some other guys. And, the Nick Foligno one is so tough because who knows what he would have been like had he been healthy. I mean,
Right.
I don't think anyone expected him to suffer the back injury, and that clearly derailed things. But
it made sense at the time.
Yeah, it did make sense at the time. I, wasn't the biggest fan of it. I think I would have preferred someone else, but I get why the Maple Leafs did it. But I just look at, their, situation right now where they don't have a ton of cap room. They don't have like a ton of major assets outside of the first round pick and Matthew Nyes to, go crazy here. And, Kyle Dubas has already mentioned that, he's not going to go crazy for a rental. It would have to be something, really special to get that done. But, this team needs some certainty, right? Like, I'm not sure if I'm Kyle Dubas in the front office. I feel super comfortable about taking a risk on someone that I don't know what I'm going to get. When you're giving up some big assets. I'm not saying that Patrick Kane would, cost a ton because he's, got the big cap hit. And like you said, he gets to call the shots on what he wants to do. But if you're giving up a major asset to get someone, like, you better know that it's going to work out. And injuries happen and you can't predict that stuff. But I just think, for the Maple Leafs, the last thing that they should be targeting right now is, bounce back candidates or, someone having a down season. Like, I would rather they go out and get someone that is playing well and is, performing at a high level. Like Bo Horvat, I think, is a good example for the Islanders. Like, they're not regretting that right now. They got a guy that's having a good year, is motivated, and he's been dynamite since they got him. Like, that's, I think, if you're the Leafs, that's what you should be looking for. Don't look for someone that, is struggling and having a tough time and hope that they can regain their form. Like, get someone that's having a really strong season that you can flip in here.
Look, they gave up a lot to get him,
they can carry it over. Yeah, exactly.
They gave up to get him, and they got an extension done pretty quickly because there was back channel talk that there was an understanding that the Islanders, or at least that market, was one of the teams that was kind of on his list had he gone to free agency. So there's a lot why that kind of worked. You could argue if it's an overpayment or not, but I don't think it will be, just given the way the economics kind of look for future. So inflation, all that fun stuff that we like to talk about. So but they get a lot to get him, and so that's why when these other risks come, you can't give up as much. And a lot of teams are kind of, seeing sticker shock when they're looking at asks, and you're seeing all the reports and rumors around about what these asks are. Well, the market's been set with Bo Horvat, and so it feels like it's not going to come down until the nitty-gritty of March 3rd, really. That's kind of where we're at.
Yeah, I think that's the prudent way to go about things. If you're any GM and you're trying to add, it's, wait it out as long as you can and hope that teams bring down their asking price. Yeah, with 2.5 weeks left to go before the deadline. Of course, Columbus is going to ask for the moon for Vladislav Gavrikov. And of course, the Arizona Coyotes are going to ask for the moon for a Jacob Chikrin. So, they are in the driver's seat right now with still a lot of time left to play. But as, things get closer to the deadline, the sellers, especially if they have guys that they're looking to move, get a little bit desperate. And they bring down the asking price to make sure they can move out these players just to get something. So they don't lose them for nothing, especially if they're UFAs at the end of the season. I think we could spend like a whole hour talking about the Chikrin situation because that's so interesting that a guy with a lot of term is being held out right now. And, we'll see where things go there. The Maple Leafs have been somewhat connected, and we talked about it last podcast, but it does feel like maybe they're not the quote-unquote mystery team that is in on Jacob Chikrin at this point. But, we've talked about it all season long that we expect the Maple Leafs to make an addition at some point. They've added a few players here or there. Conor Timmins, we saw tonight, of course, has been pretty good. But I would be surprised if there isn't another major acquisition before the March trade deadline. The next Rink-Wide Toronto postgame show will be Saturday night as the Maple Leafs welcome in the Montreal Canadiens. The Habs have gotten the better of the Maple Leafs so far this season in their two meetings. We'll see if the Maple Leafs can get their revenge. As always, you can get us on Twitter, at RinkWideTOR, at DAlter, and at RobLong34. Make sure to like, review, and subscribe to the pod wherever you get your favorite pods, and you can always get us at RinkWideToronto.com. For David Alter and producer Aaron, I'm Rob Long. You've been listening to Rinkwide Toronto, sponsored by Bodog, Canada's home for casino games and sports odds, where everyone goes to play. It has been Rinkwide Toronto, pregame, postgame, every game.
Hey, it's Darren Dreger and Ray Ferraro from the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. And Ray, we're into the second half of the NHL season, and the trade deadline is obviously getting closer.
Every night, wins and losses are starting to mean more as teams try to stay in the mix in the standings to secure that playoff spot. And man, some teams could use some help before the deadline.
Yeah, we've got the storylines, trade rumblings all covered, along with the top hockey guests twice weekly, right here on the Ray and Dregs Hockey Podcast. Check us out everywhere you get podcasts.